Cardinal Gerhard Müller has spoken again, and this time his words resonate. At a time when many faithful feel confused, divided by conflicting signals, and almost forced to choose sides, he brings everything back to the heart of the faith. It speaks of the Pope, his role, and a church at risk of being lost between image and truth. A strong, direct message, and for many, a jolt worth listening to until the end. In an interview that has already sparked heated discussion within the Catholic world, Cardinal Gerhard Müller chose to speak frankly. His words, pronounced in the columns of Il Giornale on October 6th, sound like a warning to those who attempt to reinterpret faith according to worldly logic. Without raising his voice, but with the firmness of one who knows tradition, the former prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith called everyone to the purity of the Christian message, warning that the Church cannot bend to the fashions of the time. Müller recalled how the essence of the ecclesial mission remains the proclamation of salvation, not adaptation to social changes. According to the Cardinal, the risk of a watered-down Christianity, devoid of the prophetic power of the gospel, is real and increasingly visible. From this perspective, the Cardinal invites us to return to the center of faith, to Christ himself, the only point of departure and arrival of the ecclesial journey. Any deviation towards ideological or cultural forms, he implied, ends up emptying the evangelical message and betraying its deepest truth. In his speech, Cardinal Müller wanted to pay homage to the Pontiff, Pope Leo XIV, underlining the sobriety and clarity with which he began his pontificate. "We were all happy that the Holy Father began his journey with Christ," declared the Cardinal, emphasizing how this sign of spiritual continuity is the foundation from which to begin again. No seeking consensus, no theatrics, but a return to substance. A pope who presents himself as a shepherd and not as a protagonist. Müller explained that the pontiff is not an isolated sovereign nor a celebrity, but the head of a living body, assisted by a college of cardinals that serves as the spiritual senate of the universal church. In an age marked by images and mass communication, the Cardinal wanted to clarify that the leadership of the Church must never be confused with the logic of entertainment. The Pope does not present himself according to the rules of a Hollywood star, but as a good shepherd, he reiterated, almost as if to remind everyone that authority in the Church is not earthly power, but service to the truth. Through these words, Müller outlines a model of pontificate that opposes the spectacularization of faith and reaffirms the primacy of the spiritual mission. A vision that, in its intent, would like to restore to the papal figure that sober and luminous sacredness that the news too often reduces to a public image. When Cardinal Müller addresses the topic of liturgical rites, his tone becomes more decisive, almost paternal, but also aware of the internal wounds that run through the contemporary Church. He recognizes the existence of different rites in the Catholic Church, with the Latin one as the most widespread form, but warns against any ideological rigidity. According to the Cardinal, the Council Fathers never intended to distort the ancient Mass, but rather to make the celebration more comprehensible and participatory. However, Müller observes that in some circles, the sense of balance has been lost, generating an artificial opposition between fidelity and renewal. The Cardinal admits that some faithful have become fond of the rite in its pre-1962 form, and that in some cases, this choice has become a sign of identity. But he warns against those who claim to declare every subsequent form invalid, an attitude, he states, that does not take into account the substance of the sacraments, which remains immutable. The issue, he continues, cannot be resolved with impositions or decrees, but only through true spiritual mediation. Both sides must come closer to each other, he warned, calling everyone to a conversion of heart rather than a bureaucratic compromise. In these words, one senses Müller's attempt to recompose a shattered unity, a church that does not deny its history, but at the same time does not allow the liturgy to become a battleground for ideological contention. The altar, the cardinal seems to suggest, is not a battlefield, but the place where the eternal becomes present. In words that immediately sparked discussion, Cardinal Müller warned against the improper use of certain sacred symbols, starting with the holy door. The cardinal clearly stated that such signs cannot be exploited to promote views contrary to Christian teaching. The Holy Year, he explained, is not an ideological showcase or a stage for claims, but a time of grace and conversion. According to Müller, the expression todos, 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 made famous by Pope Francis, must be understood in light of the gospel, not as everyone without moral distinction, but as everyone called to change their lives. The cardinal recalled how the Church welcomes every person, regardless of their wounds or mistakes, but always to accompany them towards the truth and freedom of the children of God. Any attempt to reinterpret welcome as approval, he warned, undermines the very meaning of mercy. It's not about closing the door to anyone, but rather about not confusing the door with a worldly celebration. To make the concept more incisive, Müller evoked the practice of the early Christians, who asked gladiators, men accustomed to public violence, to abandon that profession before receiving baptism. It was a concrete gesture, a sign of a genuine change in life. This, he explained, should be the case today. The Church is not a club for perfect people, but a home that invites conversion. However, forgiveness does not erase moral truth, and mercy cannot be separated from the call to holiness. In the final part of his interview, Cardinal Müller addressed a delicate but central topic in contemporary debate: the distinction between the different degrees of moral responsibility towards life and justice. With his characteristic clarity, he recalled that not all human actions have the same ethical weight, and that the Church throughout the centuries has always distinguished between the protection of the innocent and the intervention of the state in cases of serious crime. The cardinal spoke of crimes against innocence as the greatest moral scandal because they destroy what is most sacred, nascent, fragile, and defenseless life. In his opinion, it is not possible to equate an act that eliminates an innocent person with a sentence inflicted by a legitimate authority on someone who has attempted to kill another. Not to justify the harshness of human laws, but to reiterate a fundamental truth. Moral proportion is not a political invention, but a reality inscribed in conscience. Müller also recalled that the Church, in its long tradition, has always taught that civil authorities have the right, and sometimes the duty, to defend society. This also includes the right to regulate migration flows and protect its citizens from those who, by abusing their welcome, threaten their security. A vision that does not deny charity, but complements it with prudence, a virtue often forgotten in contemporary political language. His words, however uncomfortable, touch on a raw wound in modern society, the loss of a sense of responsibility. Where everything is equal, nothing has any value. And the Church, in the Cardinal's view, cannot allow the collective conscience to slip into this moral indifference. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.